Disciple Up, number 218. 10 things Christians accidentally say about themselves. This is Disciple Up, the Disciple Empowering Podcast where psychology, science, the real world, sin, self, and culture meet head on, and Scripture rules. If you're a follower of Christ looking to grow or looking for some biblical answers, then get ready, because it's time to Disciple Up. Hey everybody, welcome to Disciple Up, and this is episode 218. My name's Louie, I'm your host. If this is your first listen to the podcast, thanks, welcome aboard, and you have picked an unusual episode to come check out, because this is going to be a little different than what we normally do here on the big podcast, because it's a holiday week when I'm recording this, the week following July 4th, and after last week's big episode where I was really hoping to get some response, and to date, this is Monday night, I've got nothing, so I'm figuring I'm probably not going to get much, so I'm going to take a little break and do something a little strange, and I'm going to share this article with you. This is from Pathos.com, a blog called Godless in Dixie. It was written on March 6th, 2015 by Neil Carter. It's entitled 10 Things Christians Accidentally Tell Me About Themselves. And I want to respond to these kind of things. So it's going to be a little lighter than usual. Hopefully there'll be some humor in here. I hope. I could use a little laugh. I don't know about you. Starts off, say what you want about Sigmund Freud, but bizarre obsessions aside, the man came up with some brilliant observations about human behavior. Let me just break in and say, yes, he did, but so did a lot of other people who didn't have his bizarre obsessions aside, nor did they pass on to the world for who knows how long. Some of those bizarre obsessions cloaked as, quote, science, unquote. But anyway, back to the article. One of his greatest contributions to the study of human behavior was his description of defense mechanisms, those quirky little things we all do to make us feel better about ourselves. Lately, I've noticed that one defense mechanism in particular, projection, happens a lot when Christians talk about how they perceive my unbelief. Excuse me. Wikipedia summarizes the concept pretty succinctly. Quote, Freud considered that in projection thoughts, motivations, desires, and feelings that cannot be accepted as one's own are dealt with by being placed in the outside world and attributed to someone else, unquote. I would be slower to call them on this if it didn't happen with such amazing regularity, or if I hadn't already experienced life on both sides of this ideological gulf. But both are the case, and as a result, these have become so glaringly obvious to me that I've been itching to spell them out, so here goes. All right, so we know this man apparently at one time did believe in God, was a Christian perhaps, or some sort of religious faith. Now he doesn't. Okay. Number one, your worldview is egocentric and puts you at the center of all things. This is highly ironic because the opposite is really the case. I see myself as one organism among gazillions on my planet alone, and my planet is only one among, what, trillions? Far from being the center of the universe, most non-theists like myself face a greater challenge in dealing with our own relative insignificance in the vast scheme of things. Contrast this with the narrative that says one single personality created everything that exists, and he happens to care immensely about the littlest detail of your life. He hears everything you say and think, and he orchestrates every event in your life to make things go exactly as they should. I don't know that you could get any more egocentric than that right there. All right, let me respond to this. As usual, when you see these kind of articles, the people who write them distort the truth, either deliberately or they simply never understood it to begin with. First of all, let's take a look at his statement up there when he says, far from being the center of the universe, most non-theists like myself face a greater challenge in dealing with our own relative insignificance in the vast scheme of things. Oh, no. No. There's no relative insignificance. If there's no God and all this is accidental, you're not relatively insignificant. You are completely insignificant, and so is everything else. There is no significance at all, period. Significance comes when someone ranks things and says this has more value than that, or this is more important than that. And if there's no God, there's no one to do that except you, and no one cares about you because you're just, as you say here, one little organism among gazillions of others. So there's no relative insignificance. You are completely insignificant to the point of absurdity when you stop to think about it if there's no God. So, the fact that you say relative insignificance indicates that perhaps you're a little more egotistical than you'd like to believe. Second thing, Christians and theists in general, but specifically Christians, do not believe that God, quote, orchestrates every event in your life to make things go exactly as they should, unquote. That's terrible theology. If you were taught that or believe that as a Christian, or if you're listening to this now and you believe that, your theology is really bad and you need to get straightened out. Lots of bad things happen to Christians that God doesn't want. We are tempted. God does not tempt us. So this idea that the only things that happen to me are things that God is making happen because it's going to be good for me is simply not true. A lot of bad things happen, and we all know it. So, let's not play around with that. Yeah, you could say, I suppose, on the other hand, since I have two hands, why not, that it's an amazing thing that one single personality created everything that exists, and he happens to care immensely about the littlest detail of your day. Well, see, now here is a great example of a defense mechanism where he is projecting upon us the very thing that he is doing. Yes, I'm turning the table on him because he is making God a big man by saying that the idea that you could have one personality that creates everything is absurd enough, but then the fact that this being would somehow care about you at all, much less every little detail of your life, well, that's completely absurd. Well, it is completely absurd if your God's a big man, but if your God is the God of the Bible, the true and living God, omniscient and omnipresent and all-powerful and everything else, and all-knowing, then guess what? It's not absurd. And it's not egotistical because it does not make the universe about me, because God doesn't care any more about me than he does about anybody else. There are billions of people on this planet, and God loves each and every one of them exactly the same. He's not as pleased with everybody, but he loves everybody the same. So it's not egotistical. Okay, back to the article. Number 2. You're close-minded, unwilling to admit that you could be wrong. This is particularly ironic when it comes from someone who still adheres to the same religion today as the one into which he was born. By contrast, I have walked through a spectrum of beliefs and eventually worked my way out, I think the word of should be here, of the belief system I was born into, and I question what I believe every day. I've given quite a lot of thought to how many things could change my mind about what I believe today, and yet, most often when they are asked what would change their minds, the answer is nothing. So it's closed-minded to believe something firmly and just simply not be willing to admit that there's any real percentage of chance that you would change. Okay, so this, by the way, let me check down here just real quick. No. Okay, so I was just checking the bottom to see if there's anything else. They said anything else about Neil Carter, who wrote this. So Mr. Carter, are you closed-minded if I come to you and say, what would change your mind to believe that the earth is flat? And you would say, I'm going to assume, Mr. Carter would say, nothing. So does that make you closed-minded? Yeah, well, now I could give you 10 or 12 different examples right off the top of my head of things that you're not in any way, shape, or form going to be willing to admit could even in any way possibly be true. So let's not pick and choose. If they're closed-minded, if Christians are closed-minded because they don't really believe anything could convince them that Christianity is not true, then so are you. If you don't believe that the earth is flat, or you don't believe that Odin and Thor or Hercules and Zeus are out there somewhere and that you ought to be paying them respects, or, anything else that you want to come up with. But you don't believe that. And you would never even give any percentage of chance that it could be true. So if I'm closed-minded, if we're closed-minded, so are you, sir. Number 3, you crave absolute certainty and you think science is infallible. First of all, that's not how science works. Now, it's interesting. This article was written in 2015. Let me just jump in here and say this real quick. And that was before the whole science thing got into politics and into our culture now, where everybody's arguing that everybody else isn't following the science. So it's kind of interesting to read something from before this became an issue, which is sort of trying to do the same thing. He says, first of all, that's not how science works. Anything science says today could be proven wrong tomorrow, although it will be replaced by even better science, not by religious dogma. While the scientific method can greatly reduce the distorting influence of personal bias, it never eliminates it completely. But about that obsession, which, with certainty, I've often said that certainty is the currency of fundamentalism. Let me read that sentence again. But about that obsession with certainty, I've often said that certainty is the currency of fundamentalism. I say that because I've noticed that in church speak, it's the ones who are the most confident in what they believe who have the most authority. From my perspective, however, being unwilling to admit that you can be wrong is a weakness, not a strength. Okay, again, I'm going to turn this back on you. How many modern scientists today can you find who will stand up and say that they do not absolutely believe in evolution? The most authoritative people in science are the ones who will most confidently tell you that evolution is a fact, not a theory. Now, there are a growing number of scientists out there that are beginning to question it and things like that, but they're still very much in a minority and held down and denied, places of influence because, of course, they're pushing back against not religious dogma, but against secular dogma, of which there's plenty. So, it's an odd thing to accuse Christians of believing science is infallible. We're usually accused of not respecting science or not listening to science, but the fact is, of course, science doesn't work that way. Science is always questioning and always trying to figure what's really happening in this universe in a better, deeper, more comprehensive way than it did before. I think everybody should probably understand that. But let's apply this to global warming and see what happens if you stand up in a public arena and say you're not so sure about it. Oh, well, then all the science, it's settled science. That's what people are saying. Oh, well, I thought science couldn't be settled. So, the truth is, Mr. Neal, everybody craves certainty. And all of us are constantly asking questions. If you're going to be a Christian who's growing and you're not asking questions about the Bible and what it means and how you can apply it to your life, you have a problem. Number 4, here's another one. I think when you read through this, you can see he's trying to sort of take certain things and flip them, to have kind of a new approach to this. It's interesting. Number 4, you're a moral relativist. That's the unbeliever speaking to the Christian, right? Okay. I've never been an atheist who believes you can morally justify genocide, and yet I could name at least a dozen Christian friends who would say that as long as God commands people to do it, it's okay. In one breath, they will say it's never okay for a father to murder his own child, but then they'll turn around and argue that both Abraham and Yahweh should be praised for being willing to take the lives of their own sons by their own hand. The divine command theory of morality is the most slippery, relativistic moral system I've ever encountered. Under that system, virtually anything can be called good as long as it can be asserted that God commanded it. Okay, let's talk about this for a moment. I've never met an atheist who believes you can morally justify genocide. Really? Adolf Hitler? Joseph Stalin? Mao Zedong? Should I go on? So that was a really dumb statement. Let's just, call a spade here. However, that's the point he's trying to make here, is that we're trying to say you should be nice and, you shall not murder and all that stuff. But then on the other hand, we see what God did in the Old Testament. You notice how we're, once again, trolling in the Old Testament. When he commanded Joshua and the children of Israel, when they went into the Holy Land, to conquer it, to just wipe them all out. And first of all, how do you know that's genocide? Because those tribes that they're fighting were not, many of them at least, were not simply located in the Middle East. They had, related tribes other places. So there's that. Number two, I don't know anybody who wants to praise both Abraham and Yahweh, being a little sarcastic there, I assume. And secondly, I've actually never heard this phrase before, divine command theory of morality. Not saying it doesn't exist, just saying I'm not familiar with it. It might be part of Catholicism or something. I don't know. But yeah, if God tells you to do something, if he actually really does, like in Scripture he did, then that's what he wants done. And again, looking at the command, the conquest in the Old Testament is difficult because, yeah, it's bloody. It's really bloody. I mean, it's, wow, is it bloody? But these people were really corrupt, degenerate people. So, yeah. Does that make me a moral relativist? No. It does make me someone who thinks deeply about these things. For example, I believe killing is a bad thing, generally speaking, but if it comes down to killing you or letting you kill an innocent child, you're going to lose. I believe that's justified killing. Killing's never good, but sometimes in a fallen world, it is necessary. That's what I think Christians really believe, that he doesn't really bother to mention here. It's interesting that he's complaining about how relativistic our morals are, when as a atheist, I'll bet you his are incredibly relativistic as well. So if it's okay for you to be a relativist, why isn't it okay for everybody else? Number 5, you think everything just poofed into existence. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. Okay, you've probably heard that expression. And in fact, I've said it on occasion. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. So he says, are they now suggesting that faith is a bad thing to have, or that you can have too much? That's a very good comeback, by the way. And how are they defining faith now? Are they using the word faith here to mean we lack sufficient information to draw reliable conclusions, but we're going to run ahead with our beliefs in spite of that? Have they thought through the implications of accepting that definition of faith? But back to the first part. Why is it bad for us to say the universe just is and wasn't made by a person? But it's fine for them to say there's a giant invisible person who just is and wasn't made by anything or anyone. I don't see how that's an improvement on this philosophical conundrum. And for Pete's sake, the sheer fact that we don't understand how the universe became what it is does not automatically mean your giant invisible person hypothesis is the only alternative and it's automatically correct. Okay, that last line is true. That it doesn't automatically mean that, but it does mean, because we don't know where the original matter came. If you believe in the Big Bang Theory, something had to go bang. So where did the stuff that went bang came from? Where did it come from? Well, science can't tell you, and science will never be able to tell you, because real science can only only produce things that it can look at and study and test under controlled circumstances to recreate what's happening. That's how gravity was proved and other things. Okay, so we cannot go back in time. We cannot see what the original, what are they? Most scientists, I think, are still hypothesizing that it was hydrogen atoms that made the first explosion that created the Big Bang. Okay, but we're never going to be able to prove that because we can't go back there and look at it and recreate it in a controlled circumstance. Can't be done. So, maybe the universe did poof into existence. Science, which you claim to follow, say that we think is infallible. Science doesn't say. There are several different scientific theories, but of course, none of them can be proven. Although some have been disproved, like the steady state theory that the universe just it's here, it's always been here, and it always will be here. Yeah, that's there. You're not going to find many scientists that are going to back that one up nowadays. But we don't know. When you say I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, what you're saying is I can't believe that everything came from nothing because that's impossible according to science. And if everything did just spontaneously pop out of nothingness the way it is today, or even if it started as a big bang, so you had this everything that went boom was somehow came from nowhere and suddenly was somewhere and then suddenly exploded for some reason and created the whole universe, that's a big ask because the science in the universe that the Big Bang created says that can't happen. So there's a real problem. On the other hand, if a God exists, who is like the Bible describes God as all-powerful and all-knowing and all that, and eternal, which means he was not created by anything. He is uncreated and he will always be, and that he really exists outside of time. Time is something that's part of the created universe that we live in. Then it's perfectly reasonable that the universe could have, quote, poofed into existence, unquote. Or to be a little more accurate, was spoken into existence by God. So, yeah, that's why we say we don't have enough faith to be an atheist. Because at least if you believe in God the way the Bible describes God, then there's reasons for what's happening, and your faith then in that sense is reasonable. Whereas if there is no God and you just decide, well, everything just happened because it happened, and then of course everything could just unhappen tomorrow, so there's no reason, there's no logic. And by the way, if people had thought that way 500 800 years ago, we wouldn't have science today. Science comes out of a belief that we live in an ordered universe that can be explained because it was created by a reasonable being. That's what the early scientists believed, most of them. Okay, number 6. You're infringing on my religious liberty. This comes up among American evangelicals a lot. Okay, that first statement's absolutely true. Back to the article. Whenever secularists demand that federal, state, and local governments honor the U.S. Constitution's separation of church and state, oh boy, Christians of several stripes cry foul. This keeps happening around the issue of marriage equality, a case in which they're on the wrong side of the law. Mark Cato once said, quote, "The problem with being privileged your whole life is that because you have had that privilege for so long, equality starts to look like oppression," unquote. Every level of government in the United States is designed to be religiously neutral, but Christians have become so accustomed to privilege that the tiniest reduction of it feels like persecution. Even the progressive Christians have been getting on to the rest of the church for this for some time. Yeah. First of all, the whole U.S. Constitution separation of church and state thing is extremely questionable, to say the least, since the expression separation of church and state does not appear in the U.S. Constitution. So it was in a letter that Jefferson wrote and blah, blah, blah. I don't want to get into all that stuff. What he's really accusing us here of is privilege. And again, this was written in 2015, so he was on the cutting edge here. Because now everybody's privileged about everything except people that aren't privileged, and they're privileged because they're not privileged. They're privileged to be victims, which gives them access to everything in our culture, apparently. I don't know. I don't really have a whole lot to say about this, except he's right that a lot of evangelicals, especially back in 2015, said this a lot, and you don't hear me saying it. I don't hear a lot of people saying this. I do hear some. Okay. Number 7, you want everyone to think the same as you. You have an agenda and are being predatory. Free thinkers place a high premium on critical thinking skills and personal autonomy, so they're not overly fond of people being told what to think. Fundamentalist and evangelical Christians have the hardest time accepting this. They instinctively assume that everyone works off a sacrosanct canon of doctrines, and they never believe us when we tell them we're fine with people thinking for themselves. They want everyone to live like Christians, however they define that, and some of them try to make that happen by force of law, because they are so often blind to the place of privilege they've enjoyed. When we push back, they mistake our resistance for unprovoked aggression. Well, guess what? Everyone wants everyone to think like they do. I'm sorry. Everyone doesn't try to make people think like they do, but everyone would like it if people agreed with them. Because obviously, whatever you think about any given topic, you think that because you think that's right, that you think that makes sense. So, of course, it would be great if everyone thought the way you do. Of course, you know they won't, and they don't, but still, everyone thinks that way. Every group does have an agenda. This is very interesting. He says, they don't believe us when we tell them we're fine with people thinking for themselves. Well, that is a point of view. That is an agenda. That is your sacrosanct canon of doctrine, that you think everybody should be basically a god unto themselves. You think everybody has the right to decide what is right and wrong, and then act off of that belief, unless, of course, that belief contradicts yours too seriously, like, I think I should kill you because you have a hair out of place, and I don't think everyone should have neat hair, so I'm going to kill you. Now, if I were to believe something as wacky as that, I have a right to believe it, but I don't have a right to act on it, now do I? But, you see, everyone has all of these things. Everyone. They believe it's sacrosanct that everyone should think like themselves, although they work very hard to get everybody to agree with that statement, which means they're being predatory. See, this is so, and honestly, how hard do you have to think about this to see that? I glanced at this article. I did not read it before I hit the record button, and I can see it. So, and I'm not exactly a genius, okay? You could see my report cards from grade school and high school and even college. You would know that to be very true. Yeah, I'm pretty intellectually average, I think. So if I can see this, why can't you? Come on. Everybody is. And speaking of the place of privilege, there's plenty of unbelievers who don't like their place of privilege in the sciences and other places in the culture questioned at all. And when it does, they have a fit. Number 8. You don't really believe what you say you believe, your actions betray you. Because a Bible verse claims that deep down, even polytheists or closet Abrahamic monotheists, many Christians cannot accept that atheists don't really believe in any gods at all. Now, hold on. It's weird. It's not letting me do what I want to do here. Oh, okay. Here, we're just going to go after. I'll get it loaded. Okay, now, the Bible verse he quoted is actually Romans chapter 1, verses 18 to 23. So it's more than one verse, but never mind that. And it basically says, the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and they exchanged the glory of God, the glory of the immortal God, for images resembling mortal man, birds, animals, and creeping things. That's what he's referring to. Okay. Because of that, he says, many Christians cannot accept that atheists don't really believe in any gods at all. I've already discussed how this makes their definition of the word atheist so fuzzy and imprecise that they will even use it for theists who just aren't fully committed to the Christian faith. A favorite trick of apologists is to say that any time you posit a difference between right and wrong, you are, quote, borrowing from their worldview, unquote. That's a facile assertion to make, but it always seems to satisfy them just fine. The ironic thing is that Christians say they believe in things like prayer, miracles, and life after death, and yet they know good and well that they have to seek out real medical treatment for their illnesses, and they resist death perhaps even more passionately than people who believe this one life is all we get. I'd like to see some evidence of that. Oops, sorry, back to the article. I'm trying to read this without too much comment and then comment, but sometimes I can't stop myself, people, so I'm sorry. And pardon my scratchy voice, but I didn't bring anything in here to drink, so you're stuck with me, at least for a second here. I may go grab something in a second. It says they pay beautiful lip service to the notion of trusting God for everything, and yet they worry and work just as hard as everyone else at making things happen, which they say they are trusting God to accomplish. If I were to ignore what Christians say they believe and only look at what they do, I would conclude that they don't really believe in prayer or healing or heaven or even hell. If they really believed in these things as much as they seem to think they do, it would produce behaviors that, frankly, would make it impossible to maintain a normal life of any kind. There we go. Got myself something to drink. That's helping a little bit. All right. I want to get to that last sentence, but first let's start up top here. This is an interesting, because he kind of wanders around in this. Actually, I do know people who've been taught that atheists, no one's an atheist. Everybody believes in a God of one kind or another. So you can debate and argue that. And it would be an interesting discussion in the sense that how do you know that way down deep inside, subconsciously, you don't believe in a God of one sort or another? And if you believe in nothing but yourself, then does that make you a God? You know, you could go into all that, but we'll just leave that alone. If someone tells me they don't believe in God, then I try to take them at their word. However, that means then that they need to be consistent in that, right? And not, appeal to things like an atheist should never say something's wrong or something's right. They should say, I don't think that's right, or I don't think that's wrong, or even we, if they're in some kind of a group, they know everybody agrees with them on something. But there can't be any universal absolutes if you don't believe in a God, because nothing is absolute, and nothing means anything if there is no God. If this is all an accident, then nothing really matters in the long run. Now, the second half of this paragraph, which should be two paragraphs because the second half is completely different from the first, is that Christians say they believe in prayer and miracles and life after death, but they go to doctors and, quote, they resist death perhaps even more passionately than people who believe this one life is all we get, unquote. How does he know that? Can you show me any evidence of that? I will grant you that probably some Christians do. But I have watched probably more Christians die than he has as a pastor. And I can tell you that the vast majority of them just gave up and went peacefully. Now, that's not too unusual nowadays because most people, when they die today, the way we, usher people off this mortal coil is they're so drugged up they don't even know where they are. And we do that so they're not at any pain and so they can have, quote, death with dignity, unquote. I still, as much as I appreciate everything hospice does, and they were certainly a huge help for us with my mother, and I've worked with them and supported them, I still have a real problem with that death with dignity thing, but that's a topic for another day. Maybe it's just me, but I don't see the dignity. Okay. So, is working at a job to make money, to pay your bills, to buy your stuff that you need, going to the doctor, going to the dentist like I did this last week, is that a sign that I don't trust God? No. Because God himself commands us to work. So, apparently God knows that work's a good thing for us. God understands the human psyche well enough to know that we need to work. We need to be doing something that has some significance to it. And even if your job is not significant, if that job helps you support your family, or even just yourself, if you're single like me, that's a significant thing, and so it makes it important. Sitting around all day doing nothing is not good for you. So I think this is a completely specious argument, to throw around a big word like he used. Yeah, he used the word facile. That's it. That's a good word. Just isn't true. Number 9, you just want God to give you things. Christians clearly feel a need to attribute apostasy to anything and everything besides logical inference, and their favorite explanation is that our motives were ignoble. Perhaps we are being motivated by selfish desires for wealth, prosperity, or importance. We often speak about the ineffectiveness of prayer, but centuries of experience have taught them to cite that objection as another evidence that we just want things, and if God won't give them to us, then we'll just leave. Meanwhile, they are looking forward to mansions in heaven and streets of gold and an eternity of bliss and health in the afterlife. You know, the further he goes, the worse his argumentation gets. He must have front-loaded the article. Probably didn't think anybody would read this far, because on the internet, most people don't. Christians clearly feel a need to attribute apostasy to anything and everything besides logical inference. That's a weird thing to say. So now logical inference is bad? I don't know what he's getting at there. Look. Again, notice the distortions here. He says, meanwhile, they're looking forward to mansions in heaven on streets of gold. Nobody takes that literally, or at least not very many people. I'm sure some do, so I overstated it when I said nobody, but come on. Yeah. So this is just silly. And it's interesting that he doesn't act as though he's ever heard here or in the last one when he talks about healing of the whole prosperity gospel movement, which I am not a fan of, to put it absolutely as mildly as possible. Because they certainly, they're not even shy about wanting stuff from God. All right, number 10, you're obsessed with sex. Not everyone runs into this one, but some Christians see virtually all movement towards non-belief as an excuse for sexual freedom. Again, I'm just going to interrupt right now. I'm not going to read the whole thing because this is a long one. I've been around a long time in the church, and I have not seen that. They interpret sincere questioning of the tenets of their faith as attempts to be free from moral restraint, meaning more sex. No, not necessarily meaning more sex. It's moral restraint of all kinds. This is particularly telling. Now, I'll be among the first to tell you that I love sex. I consider myself a sex-positive person, and I think the principles of humanism track perfectly well with owning and enjoying your own body. But, the principles of humanism. Sacrosanct dogma from the man who claims to not have any. So you're not really thinking for yourself and coming up with all this by yourself, are you, Mr. Neal? No, you're just doing what everyone does at some point, and that is You're studying things, you're listening to things, and you're, by the way, his last name's Carter, not Neil. Sorry, I just checked because that didn't sound right to me. And you're following humanism, which is a distinct, developed, philosophical, moral point of view. He goes on, but sex only takes up so much of your day, you know? Meanwhile, a disproportionate amount of Christian culture is taken up with pursuing sexual purity, as if measuring one's restraint on this single item overrules all other indicators of moral fortitude. Christianity has a major hang-up about sex, and its multiplication of rules around that single topic amounts to a collective neurosis, unquote. Sorry, that's just, I don't see that as true at all. There are certain really kind of far out there fundamentalist groups that do. Otherwise, this is simply not true of the modern American church. Sorry about that. I keep thinking of more examples of projection, but I've listed enough for now. Yeah, most of them have been lame. I'll simply conclude by warning you that you should take care of what you say about other people, because it tells them as much about you as it does about them, which is exactly, sir, what you have done here in this blog post. It reminds me of an old joke that showed up in the movie What About Bob? The doctor draws two circles and says, "What do you see?" The guy says, "Sex." So the doctor draws trees. "What do you see?" The guy says, "Sex." The doctor draws a car and an owl. Sex, sex, sex. The doctor says to him, "You're obsessed with sex." He replies, "Well, you're the one drawing all the dirty pictures." Okay. It's not really very funny, but beyond that, I think if anyone has a hang-up about sex here, maybe it's not us Christians, maybe it's you, maybe it's humanists, maybe it's our society, which keeps pushing the boundaries. And now we're to the point where, you know, gay marriage is all good and fine. So the next thing you're going to be looking at is of course, having more than one spouse, and not far behind, coming up strongly, it's being pushed by more people now, is this whole idea of not being able to have sex with minors. That's something that a lot of people want to do away with. Now, there have been, of course, weirdos all along that have felt this way. NAMBLA, the National Man-Boy Love Association, has been around for years. Their slogan is, if it's after 8, it's too late. But more and more people now are saying that, you know, that this whole thing of incest, with family members, that should be done away with, so that, you could have truly loving families, and all this stuff is happening. So if there's an obsession with sex in our culture, it's not coming from the church. Let me just say, it's coming from the culture, the world. Okay, that's going to do it. That's all I got for you this week. Just thought that would be interesting to run through. If you want a link to that article, it's in the show notes at discipleup.org. If you heard last week's podcast, and if you didn't, please go back and listen to it. I'm still hoping to get some responses from it, because what can you say? I'm a hopeful guy. So till next time, this is Louie. By the way, if you want to get a hold of me, because I forgot to mention that this week, didn't I? You can email me at Louie, Louie, at discipleup.org, or you can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/discipleup, and drop your comments, questions, whatever, right there. So till next time, this is Louie saying thanks for listening. God bless all of you, and remember that every time is a good time to disciple up. So long.
Disciple Up, the Empowering Disciples podcast, is written, produced, directed, in as much as there's any direction of this thing at all, edited every once in a while, and paid for by Louie. It's his personal ministry, and is not connected to Christ Church on the River. CCR does not sponsor, pay for, or necessarily approve the content found therein. The theme music for Disciple Up is Hot Wheels by Varensky. Yes, Louie actually paid for the rights to this very cool piece of music, so don't worry, and please call off the lawyers, as he's busy enough without having to deal with all that. All opinions expressed during Disciple Up are Louie's and Louie's alone. They do not necessarily represent those of our sponsor, the Lord Jesus Christ. However, where the opinions, thoughts, impressions, and feelings shared are in line with God's Word and faithfully represent what our Lord says in His holy word, the Bible, then they are representative of our Lord Jesus Christ. If you're wondering how the heck you're supposed to know this, remember, God tells you to test all things. Hold on to the truth. It's up to you to do the due diligence that God commands, so do it. Don't whine about it, and don't complain about how hard it is. Don't blame me for it. Disciple Up, and do what you know you're supposed to do. If you'd like to know more about Louie or Disciple Up, please go to discipleup.org and check out everything you find there. Or not, it's completely up to you. Disciple Up, the Empowering Disciples podcast will, God willing, publish an episode every week covering different areas of concern to disciples of Jesus. If that's important to you, then please subscribe on iTunes, Google, Stitcher, or another one of the many podcast aggregators available to you. If it's not, then don't. If you'd like to get in touch, please email Louie at louie@discipleup.org. God bless you.